Hello, friends. Welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. We have so many exciting things going on today. I am very, very happy to be with you for our continuing read along of A Room with a View. We're getting so close to the end. In anticipation of that, I am prepping my tea right now, just pulling out the loose leaf tea basket. Um, Today's tea is an Earl Grey tea. I'm actually finishing off a huge canister that normally in my normal tea consumption would have lasted me a really long time. But I think I know I got it sometime during the coronavirus thing. Let's see, because I picked it up over at Olive Baking Company over on Mission Boulevard here in PB. But yeah, I got the Earl Grey tea from Cafe Virtuoso, and yeah, completely empty now. So that's good. We worked our way through that Earl Grey tea. It's so nice. I have a couple more flavored Earl Grey teas that I received recently, but I'm thinking I might need to get another one to have on stock because I feel like you should always have an Earl Grey available in case you need it. It that sounds a little weird to say, but seriously, if you're a tea drinker, I think Earl Grey tea it's a staple. You gotta have it in your cupboard. It's so delicious. So good. That one smells really nice, but now's the decision. Do I get the same tea or get a different Earl Grey? Oof. If anyone has a particular Earl Grey that they really, really love, please go ahead and comment. I'd love to hear suggestions because once I get another big canister, I'm committed for at least a few months. So this is the time. If there's something else you guys really recommend as being amazing, please give me your suggestions. Speaking of amazing and things that we should do together in the future, we have had a vote going on for the past week, and I want to announce the winner. I did announce it on the page too, in case you saw it there. Our next book that we're going to read together is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Thank you to everybody who voted. It was the overwhelming favorite. I didn't even see the need to do a drawing. Here, let's do a quick drawing. Why, look, let's pick out what book. Oh, the book is going to be A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And so I already mapped it out. It's a very short story. It's actually only 5 chapters, but we're going to stretch it out into 9 days of reading. And so the other thing I'm asking you to vote on really quickly, if you wouldn't mind, let me know if you would like to continue reading other stories by Dickens, probably Christmas themed, to take us through the end of the year. We're going to be reading all the way through December 31st. Or do you want to read something totally unrelated, another short novel? There is a poll going on right now. I suggested Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde just because it is extremely skinny, and I haven't read it since I was literally a little girl. I think I read it the summer before fifth grade. So I know it's been a long time since I read it, so it'd be fun to revisit. Or do we want to just stay with Dickens? Or do we want to read a different short story, a short novel? So the options are out there. Please go ahead and vote as to whether you would like to just read Dickens, which is currently the winner, or the leader, or if you'd like to read something else. And if so, what short novel would you like to read? So we're going to go ahead and pick that winner on Monday next week, which will be our last day of reading A Room with a View. I'll also create an event in case you'd like to do a little tea party with me on Tuesday, December 1st, to celebrate and just to talk a bit about A Room with a View. Maybe we'll play a little bit of the music from the soundtrack of the Merchant Ivory production, which I'm obsessed with. But yeah, we can enjoy that one last time before we go into our next book of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what happened yesterday. Yesterday's reading was wonderful. It was thoroughly scandalous, which made it great. The chapter was entitled The Disaster Within, but I thought it was great. Let's see. So basically, it started out the ladies in the family were getting ready to go to church, and we met a new character. The character who was quite significant for this one chapter. This character was a library book! Yay! It was a red book, which they had left outside. That was the start of the scandal right there, in my opinion. Left a library book outside, untended, with the wind blowing oh, disgraceful! Disgraceful conduct to a library book. Remember, this is your librarian message for the day. When you borrow something, you take extra special good care of it because we're sharing it with our friends. Oh, I say it a little sarcastically, but I actually mean it too. You take extra special care of it when you borrow something. Likewise, Cecil Vyse left this book outside as if there's more reason to question Lucy choosing Cecil. Left his library book outside. So, the book was called Under a Loggia, And Lucy picked it up and set it down, and then the ladies all go to church. When they get back, let's see. Oh, actually, before they get back from church, when they leave, they see that across the way is Sissy Villa and the Emersons, and they go over to speak with them. And George Emerson actually gets along really well with Mrs. Honeychurch. He is clever, he's funny, he's a nice guy. And they say, well, weren't you going to come over and play tennis this afternoon? You should absolutely come over and play tennis this afternoon. And it's cute too, because there's a little scene there where they say, well, if you don't mind playing tennis on a Sunday. And the elder Mr. Emerson just interrupts, like, what do you mean? Why would he mind? With his education, of course I've just, told him not to count Sunday as anything different than any other day of the week. And like, no. They just cut it off. George doesn't mind playing tennis on Sunday. This is okay. And so they end up talking a bit more, and the father convinces George to continue on and to go with them. There's a brief moment where George is unhappy because he is reminded about Lucy going to marry Cecil and such. But she says, I do hope you'll come too. I hope he will, that George will come and join them for tennis over at the house. And so George does eventually decide to come. Let's see. She's playing piano. George shows up. They end up wanting to play tennis. They want to have a foursome. Cecil says he doesn't play, so he doesn't want to play. Minnie Beebe says, I'm willing to be your fourth person. But because she is the niece of the Reverend, she's not allowed to play such a physical activity on a Sunday, which is a day of rest. But Lucy, they pointed out, is rather amphibious that way. She keeps the Sabbath in the morning, and then after lunch, she breaks it without reluctance. So she changes her frock and joins the other gentlemen for a game of tennis. They play doubles. Her team loses. George Emerson's team wins. And then they have a conversation. They sit down. She is nearby, Cecil Vyse, her fiancé, and George Emerson sits down near her feet on the grass, and they're talking to each other. And it's interesting, too, because Cecil is talking about the book that he has, the Red Library book in question, Under Logia, and he's talking a little bit about the absurdity of the story. And meanwhile, she's having a little side conversation with George Emerson, but going back and forth between these two gentlemen. And they realize eventually that this book, written by Joseph Emery Prank, that must indeed be the pen name for Eleanor Lavish, the traveler whom they met in Italy, who was also staying at the Pensione Bertolini with them. And so also there's a cute scene as well where Cecil is talking about how modern books are all bad because everyone just writes for money in these days. What I find great about that is, of course, we are reading that in a book penned by E.M. Forster, who was at the time writing a quite modern story about modern social events. So he must have clearly done it for money. So she's having this discussion with George Emerson. It's a little bit prickly, but she still is continuing this conversation with George Emerson. Meanwhile, Cecil seems to be trying to get their attention talking about the book. And finally, Cecil says, you know what? I don't want to interrupt. We're getting all this great stuff from George Emerson. You don't need me here. And she says, no. I do want to hear you. Please go ahead and read from the book. And so he says, well, there's a scene about a view. And so she looks it up for him, and as she pages through the book in chapter 2, she finds it, and she says, no, it actually isn't worth reading. That's not a scene that we want to read out loud. But he takes it from her, he starts to read it, and the description he gives is of that moment from the chapter like a week or so ago when Lucy and George Emerson had encountered each other in the fields outside of Florence, and that without a word he had embraced her in his arms and kissed her. And that is the scene described in this book by Eleanor Lavish, and that Cecil is reading aloud. And again, she's trying to avoid eye contact with Cecil because she's so embarrassed. And so she looks over, and instead she's sharing eye contact with George Emerson, the man who kissed her so scandalously in a field, with the same passage being described by her fiancé. Oh, so deliciously awkward. Ooh, it's a great scene. So then Cecil finishes that passage. He says, that actually isn't even the one that I was looking for. There's a better scene about a view. Lucy then says, let's go in. and she is going in, followed by Cecil, followed by George. But the book, our other character for the last chapter, the book does not finish causing mischief, because it turned out the book had been forgotten. When Cecil goes back to get the book, George, who loves passionately, blunders against her in the narrow path and kisses her once again. So this time, then he leaves, and Cecil is left with her to walk back in. So that was chapter 15. Oh, so scandalous. All right, so let's go in. Today we're going to read 2 chapters. I will mention, I'm going to go ahead and give a little something away. It's in the table of contents, so if you're reading in print, you would have seen it too. Chapter 16 is entitled Lying to George, and chapter 17 is Lying to Cecil. So I'm just going to bring back to remember a few chapters ago when Lucy was reflecting on how she had told a lie to her mother about the name of the Emersons, calling them the Harrises, and how she was amazed that she was able to tell that lie, and she was rather disturbed at herself for being able to do so easily, and so she had resolved that she would not tell any further lies. All right, I'm just going to say, today we have 2 chapters, both with lying. Whew, let's go in. Start with chapter 16, which is entitled Lying to George. But Lucy had developed since the spring. That is to say, she was now better able to stifle the emotions of which the conventions and the world disapprove. Though the danger was greater, she was not shaken by deep sobs. She said to Cecil, "I am not coming in to tea. Tell mother I must write some letters," and went up to her room. Then she prepared for action. Love felt and returned, love which our bodies exact and our hearts have transfigured, love which is the most real thing that we shall ever meet, reappeared now as the world's enemy, and she must stifle it. She sent for Miss Bartlett. The contest lay not between love and duty. Perhaps there never is such a contest. It lay between the real and the pretended, and Lucy's first aim was to defeat herself. As her brain clouded over, as the memory of the views grew dim and the words of the book died away, she returned to her old shibboleth of nerves. She conquered her breakdown. Tampering with the truth, she forgot that the truth had ever been. Remembering that she was engaged to Cecil, she compelled herself to confused remembrances of George. He was nothing to her. He never had been anything. He had behaved abominably. She had never encouraged him. The armor of falsehood is subtly wrought out of darkness, and hides a man not only from others, but from his own soul. In a few moments, Lucy was equipped for battle. "Something too awful has happened," she began, as soon as her cousin arrived. "Do you know anything about Miss Lavish's novel?" Miss Bartlett looked surprised, and said that she had not read the book, nor known that it was published. Eleanor was a reticent woman at heart. "There is a scene in it. The hero and heroine make love. Do you know about that?" "Dear? Do you know about it, please?" she repeated. "They are on a hillside, and Florence is in the distance." "My good Lucia, I am all at sea. I know nothing about it whatever." "There are violets." "I cannot believe it is a coincidence." "Charlotte, Charlotte, how could you have told her? I have thought before speaking. It must be you." "Told her what?" she asked, with growing agitation. "About that dreadful afternoon in February." Miss Bartlett was genuinely moved. "Oh, Lucy, dearest girl, she hasn't put that in her book?" Lucy nodded. "Not so that one could recognize it?" "Yes." "Then never, never, never more shall Eleanor Lavish be a friend of mine." "So you did tell." "I did just happen, when I had tea with her at Rome, in the course of conversation." "But Charlotte, what about the promise you gave me when we were packing? Why did you tell Miss Lavish when you wouldn't even let me tell Mother?" I will never forgive Eleanor. She has betrayed my confidence. Why did you tell her, though? This is a most serious thing. Why does anyone tell anything? The question is eternal, and it was not surprising that Miss Bartlett should only sigh faintly in response. She had done wrong. She admitted it. She only hoped that she had not done harm. She had told Eleanor in the strictest confidence. Lucy stamped with irritation. Cecil happened to read out the passage aloud to me and to Mr. Emerson. It upset Mr. Emerson, and he insulted me again, behind Cecil's back. Ugh! Is it possible that men are such brutes? Behind Cecil's back, as we were walking up the garden. Miss Bartlett burst into self-accusations and regrets. What is to be done now? Can you tell me? Oh, Lucy, I shall never forgive myself, never to my dying day. Fancy, if your prospects— I know, said Lucy, wincing at the word. I see now why you wanted me to tell Cecil, and what you meant by some other source. You knew that you had told Miss Lavish, and that she was not reliable. It was Miss Bartlett's turn to wince. However, said the girl, despising her cousin's shiftiness, what's done's done. You have put me in a most awkward position. How am I to get out of it? Miss Bartlett could not think. The days of her energy were over. She was a visitor, not a chaperone, and a discredited visitor at that. She stood with clasped hands while the girl worked herself into the necessary rage. That man must have such a setting down that he won't forget. And who's to give it to him? I can't tell mother now, owing to you. Nor Cecil, Charlotte, owing to you. I am caught up every way. I think I shall go mad. I have no one to help me. That's why I've sent for you. What's wanted is a man with a whip. Miss Bartlett agreed. One wanted a man with a whip. Yes, but it's no good agreeing. What's to be done? We women go maundering on. What does a girl do when she comes across a cad? I always said he was a cad, dear. Give me credit for that, at all events, from the very first moment when he said his father was having a bath. Oh, bother the credit and who's been right or wrong. We've both made a muddle of it. George Emerson is still down the garden there, and is he to be left unpunished, or isn't he? I want to know. Miss Bartlett was absolutely helpless. Her own exposure had unnerved her, and thoughts were colliding painfully in her brain. She moved feebly to the window and tried to detect the cad's white flannels among the laurels. You were ready enough at the Bertolini when you rushed me off to Rome. Can't you speak again to him now? Willingly would I move heaven and earth. I want something more definite, said Lucy contemptuously. Will you speak to him? It is the least you can do, surely, considering it all happened because you broke your word. Never again shall Eleanor Lavish be a friend of mine. Really, Charlotte was outdoing herself. Yes or no, please. Yes or no. It is the kind of thing that only a gentleman can settle. George Emerson was coming up the garden with a tennis ball in his hand. Very well, said Lucy with an angry gesture. No one will help me? I will speak to him myself. And immediately she realized that this was what her cousin had intended all along. Hello, Emerson, called Freddie from below. Found the lost ball? Good man. Want any tea? And there was an eruption from the house onto the terrace. Oh, Lucy, but that is brave of you. I admire you. They had gathered round George, who beckoned, she felt, over the rubbish, the sloppy thoughts, the furtive yearnings that were beginning to cumber her soul. Her anger faded at the sight of him. Ah, the Emersons were fine people in their way. She had to subdue a rush in her blood before saying, Freddie has taken him into the dining room. The others are going down the garden. Come, let us get this over quickly. Come. I want you in the room, of course. Lucy, do you mind doing it? How can you ask such a ridiculous question? Poor Lucy! She stretched out her hand. I seem to bring nothing but misfortune wherever I go. Lucy nodded. She remembered their last evening at Florence, the packing, the candle, the shadow of Miss Bartlett's toque on the floor. She was not to be trapped by pathos a second time. Eluding her cousin's caress, she led the way downstairs. Try the jam, Freddie was saying. The jam's jolly good. George, looking big and disheveled, was pacing up and down the dining room. As she entered, he stopped and said, No, nothing to eat. You go down to the others, said Lucy. Charlotte and I will give Mr. Emerson all he wants. Where's Mother? She's started on her Sunday writing. She's in the drawing room. That's all right. You go away. He went off singing. Lucy sat down at the table. Miss Bartlett, who was thoroughly frightened, took up a book and pretended to read. She would not be drawn into an elaborate speech. She just said, I can't have it, Mr. Emerson. I cannot even talk to you. Go out of this house and never come into it again as long as I live here. Flushing as she spoke and pointing to the door. I hate a row. Go, please. What? No discussion. But I can't. She shook her head. Go, please. I do not want to call in Mr. Vyse. You don't mean, he said, absolutely ignoring Miss Bartlett. You don't mean that you are going to marry that man? The line was unexpected. She shrugged her shoulders as if his vulgarity wearied her. You are merely ridiculous, she said quietly. Then his words rose gravely over hers. You cannot live with Vyse. He's only for an acquaintance. He is for society and cultivated talk. He should know no one intimately, least of all a woman. It was a new light on Cecil's character. Have you ever talked to Vyse without feeling tired? I can scarcely discuss. No, but have you ever? He is the sort who are all right so long as they keep to things, books, pictures, but kill when they come to people. That's why I'll speak out through all this muddle even now. It's shocking enough to lose you in any case, but generally a man must deny himself joy, and I would have held back if your Cecil had been a different person. I would never have let myself go. But I saw him first in the National Gallery when he winced because my father mispronounced the names of great painters. Then he brings us here, and we find it is to play some silly trick on a kind neighbor. That is the man all over, playing tricks on people, on the most sacred form of life that he could find. Next, I meet you together and find him protecting and teaching you and your mother to be shocked when it was for you to settle whether you were shocked or no. Cecil all over again. He daren't let a woman decide. He's the type who's kept Europe back for 1,000 years. Every moment of his life, he's forming you, telling you what's charming or amusing or ladylike, telling you what a man thinks womanly. And you of all women, listen to his voice instead of your own. So it was at the rectory when I met you both again. So it has been the whole of this afternoon. Therefore, not therefore I kissed you, because the book made me do that, and I wish to goodness I had more self-control. I'm not ashamed. I don't apologize, but it has frightened you, and you may not have noticed that I love you. Or would you have told me to go and dealt with the tremendous thing so lightly? But therefore, I settled to fight him. Lucy thought of a very good remark. You say Mr. Vyse wants me to listen to him, Mr. Emerson. Pardon me for suggesting that you have caught the habit. And he took the shoddy reproof and touched it into immortality. He said, Yes, I have, and sank down as if suddenly weary. I'm the same kind of brute at bottom. This desire to govern a woman, It lies very deep, and men and women must fight it together before they shall enter the garden. But I do love you, surely in a better way than he does." He thought, "Yes, really in a better way. I want you to have your own thoughts, even when I hold you in my arms." He stretched them towards her. "Lucy, be quick. There's no time for us to talk now. Come to me as you came in the spring, and afterwards I will be gentle and explain. I have cared for you since that man died. I cannot live without you. No good, I thought, she is marrying someone else. But I meet you again, when all the world is glorious water and sun. As you came through the wood, I saw that nothing else mattered. I called. I wanted to live and have my chance of joy." "And Mr. Vyse?" said Lucy, who kept commendably calm. "Does he not matter? That I love Cecil and shall be his wife shortly? A detail of no importance, I suppose." But he stretched his arms over the table towards her. "May I ask what you intend to gain by this exhibition?" He said, "It is our last chance. I shall do all that I can." And as if he had done all else, he turned to Miss Bartlett, who sat like some portent against the skies of the evening. "You wouldn't stop us this second time if you understood," he said. "I have been into the dark, and I am going back into it, unless you will try to understand." Her long, narrow head drove backwards and forwards as though demolishing some invisible obstacle. She did not answer. "It is being young," he said quietly, picking up his racket from the floor and preparing to go. "It is being certain that Lucy cares for me really. It is that love and youth matter intellectually." In silence the two women watched him. His last remark, they knew, was nonsense, but was he going after it or not? Would not he, the cad, the charlatan, attempt a more dramatic finish? No, he was apparently content. He left them, carefully closing the front door, and when they looked through the hall window, they saw him go up the drive and begin to climb the slopes of withered fern behind the house. Their tongues were loosed, and they burst into stealthy rejoicings. "Oh, Lucia, come back here! Oh, what an awful man!" Lucy had no reaction, at least, not yet. "Well, he amuses me," she said. "Either I'm mad or else he is, and I'm inclined to think it's the latter. One more fuss through with you, Charlotte. Many thanks. I think, though, that this is the last. My admirer will hardly trouble me again." And Miss Bartlett, too, essayed the roguish, "Well, it isn't everyone who could boast such a conquest, dearest, is it? Oh, one oughtn't to laugh, really. It must have been very serious. But you were so sensible and brave, so unlike the girls of my day. Let's go down to them." But once in the open air, she paused. Some emotion, pity, terror, love, but the emotion was strong, seized her, and she was aware of autumn. Summer was ending, and the evening brought her odors of decay, the more pathetic because they were reminiscent of spring. That something or other mattered intellectually? A leaf, violently agitated, danced past her, while other leaves lay motionless. That the earth was hastening to re-enter darkness, and the shadows of those trees to creep over Windy Corner? "Hello, Lucy! There's still light enough for another set, if you two'll hurry." "Mr. Emerson has had to go." "Ah, what a nuisance! That spoils the four. I say, Cecil, do play, do. There's a good chap. It's Floyd's last day. Do play tennis with us, just this once." Cecil's voice came. "My dear Freddie, I am no athlete. As you well remarked this very morning, there are some chaps who are no good for anything but books. I plead guilty to being such a chap, and will not inflict myself on you." The scales fell from Lucy's eyes. How had she stood Cecil for a moment? He was absolutely intolerable, and the same evening she broke off her engagement. And now chapter 17, which is entitled Lying to Cecil. He was bewildered. He had nothing to say. He was not even angry, but stood with a glass of whiskey between his hands, trying to think what had led her to such a conclusion. She had chosen the moment before bed, when, in accordance with her bourgeois habit, she always dispensed drinks to the men. Freddie and Mr. Floyd were sure to retire with their glasses, while Cecil invariably lingered, sipping at his while she locked up the sideboard. "I am very sorry about it," she said. "I have carefully thought things over. We are too different. I must ask you to release me and try to forget that there ever was such a foolish girl." It was a suitable speech, but she was more angry than sorry, and her voice showed it. "Different? How? How?" "I haven't had a really good education, for one thing," she continued, still on her knees by the sideboard. "My Italian trip came too late, and I am forgetting all that I learnt there. I shall never be able to talk to your friends, or behave as a wife of yours should." "I don't understand you. You aren't like yourself. You're tired. Lucy." "Tired?" she retorted, kindling at once. "That is exactly like you. You always think women don't mean what they say." "Well, you sound tired, as if something has worried you." "What if I do? It doesn't prevent me from realizing the truth. I can't marry you, and you will thank me for saying so some day." "You had that bad headache yesterday." "All right," for she had exclaimed indignantly, "I see it's much more than headaches. But give me a moment's time." He closed his eyes. "You must excuse me if I say stupid things, but my brain has gone to pieces. Part of it lives 3 minutes back, when I was sure that you loved me, and the other part, I find it difficult. I am likely to say the wrong thing." It struck her that he was not behaving so badly, and her irritation increased. She again desired a struggle, not a discussion. To bring on the crisis, she said, "There are days when one sees clearly, and this is one of them. Things must come to a breaking point sometime, and it happens to be today. If you want to know, quite a little thing decided me to speak to you. When you wouldn't play tennis with Freddie." "I never do play tennis," said Cecil, painfully bewildered. "I never could play. I don't understand a word you say." "You can play well enough to make up a 4. I thought it abominably selfish of you." "No, I can't. Well, never mind the tennis. Why couldn't you have warned me if you felt anything wrong? You talked of our wedding at lunch. At least, you let me talk." "I knew you wouldn't understand," said Lucy quite crossly. "I might have known that there have been these dreadful explanations. I might have known there would have been these dreadful explanations. Of course, it isn't the tennis. That was only the last straw to all I have been feeling for weeks. Surely it was better not to speak until I was certain." She developed this position. "Often before I have wondered if I was fitted for your wife. For instance, in London. And are you fitted to be my husband? I don't think so. You don't like Freddie, nor my mother. There was always a lot against our engagement, Cecil, but all our relations seemed pleased, and we met so often, and it was no good mentioning it until all things came to a point. They have today. I see clearly. I must speak. That's all." "I cannot think you were right," said Cecil gently. "I cannot tell why, but though all that you say sounds true, I feel that you are not treating me fairly. It's all too horrible." "What's the good of a scene?" "No good. But surely I have a right to hear a little more." He put down his glass and opened the window. From where she knelt, jangling her keys, she could see a slit of darkness, and peering into it, as if it would tell him that little more, his long, thoughtful face. "Don't open the window," And you'd better draw the curtain too. Freddie or anyone might be outside." He obeyed. "I really think we had better go to bed, if you don't mind. I shall only say things that will make me unhappy afterwards. As you say, it is all too horrible, and it is no good talking." But to Cecil, now that he was about to lose her, she seemed each moment more desirable. He looked at her instead of through her for the first time since they were engaged. From a Leonardo she had become a living woman, with mysteries and forces of her own, with qualities that even eluded art. His brain recovered from the shock, and in a burst of genuine devotion he cried, "But I love you, and I did think you loved me." "I did not," she said. "I thought I did at first. I am sorry, and ought to have refused you this last time, too." He began to walk up and down the room, and she grew more and more vexed at his dignified behavior. She had counted on his being petty. It would have made things easier for her. By a cruel irony, she was drawing out all that was finest in his disposition. "You don't love me, evidently. I dare say you are right not to, but it would hurt a little less if I knew why." "Because—" a phrase came to her, and she accepted it. "You're the sort who can't know, you're the sort who can't know anyone intimately." A horrified look came into his eyes. "I don't mean exactly that. But you will question me, though I beg you not to, and I must say something. It is that, more or less. When we were only acquaintances, you let me be myself. But now you're always protecting me." Her voice swelled. "I won't be protected. I will choose for myself what is ladylike and right. To shield me is an insult. Can't I be trusted to face the truth, but I must get it second-hand through you? A woman's place. You despise my mother, I know you do, because she's conventional and bothers over puddings, but, oh goodness," she rose to her feet, "conventional, Cecil, you're that, for you may understand beautiful things, but you don't know how to use them, and you wrap yourself up in art and books and music, and would try to wrap up me. I won't be stifled, not by the most glorious music, for people are more glorious, and you hide them from me. That's why I break off my engagement. You were all right so long as you kept to things, but when you came to people—" She stopped. There was a pause. Then Cecil said with great emotion, "It is true." "True on the whole," she corrected, full of some vague shame. "True, every word. It is a revelation. It is I. Anyhow, those are my reasons for not being your wife." He repeated, "The sort that can know no one intimately. It is true. I fell to pieces the very first day we were engaged. I behaved like a cad to Beebe and to your brother. You are even greater than I thought." She withdrew a step. "I'm not going to worry you. You are far too good to me. I shall never forget your insight, and dear, I only blame you for this. You might have warned me, and so have given me a chance to improve. I have never known you till this evening. I have just used you as a peg for my silly notions of what a woman should be. But this evening you are a different person. New thoughts, even a new voice." "What do you mean by a new voice?" she asked, seized with incontrollable anger. "I mean that a new person seems speaking through you," said he. Then she lost her balance. She cried, "If you think I am in love with someone else, you are very much mistaken." "Of course I don't think that. You are not that kind, Lucy." "Oh, yes, you do think it. It's your old idea, the idea that has kept Europe back. I mean, the idea that women are always thinking of men. If a girl breaks off her engagement, everyone says, 'Oh, she has someone else in her mind. She hopes to get someone else.' It's disgusting. Brutal, as if a girl can't break it off for the sake of freedom. He answered reverently, I may have said that in the past. I shall never say it again. You have taught me better. She began to redden and pretended to examine the windows again. Of course, there is no question of someone else in this, no jilting or any such nauseous stupidity. I beg your pardon most humbly if my words suggested that there was. I only meant that there was a force in you that I hadn't known of up till now. All right, Cecil, that will do. Don't apologize to me. It was my mistake. It is a question between ideals, yours and mine, pure abstract ideals, and yours are the nobler. I was bound up in the old vicious notions, and all the time you were splendid and new. His voice broke. I must actually thank you for what you have done, for showing me what I really am. Solemnly, I thank you for showing me a true woman. Will you shake hands? Of course I will, said Lucy, twisting up her other hand in the curtains. Good night, Cecil. Goodbye. That's all right. I'm sorry about it. Thank you very much for your gentleness. Let me light your candle, shall I? They went into the hall. Thank you. Good night again. Oh, excuse me. Thank you. Good night again. God bless you, Lucy. Goodbye, Cecil. She watched him steal upstairs while the shadows from the banisters passed over her face like the beat of wings. On the landing he paused strong in his renunciation and gave her a look of memorable beauty. For all his culture, Cecil was an ascetic at heart, and nothing in his love became him like the leaving of it. She could never marry. In the tumult of her soul that stood firm. Cecil believed in her. She must some day believe in herself. She must be one of the women whom she had praised so eloquently, who care for liberty and not for men. She must forget that George loved her, that George had been thinking through her and gained her this honorable release, that George had gone away into, what was it? The darkness. She put out the lamp. It did not do to think, nor, for the matter of that, to feel. She gave up trying to understand herself and joined the vast armies of the benighted, who follow neither the heart nor the brain, and march to their destiny by catchwords. The armies are full of pleasant and pious folks, but they have yielded to the only enemy that matters, the enemy within. They have sinned against passion and truth, and vain will be their strife after virtue. As the years pass, they are censured. Their pleasantry and their piety show cracks. Their wit becomes cynicism, their unselfishness hypocrisy. They feel and produce discomfort wherever they go. They have sinned against Eros and against Pallas, Athene, and not by any heavenly intervention, but by the ordinary course of nature. Those allied deities, let me go back to the sentence. They have sinned against Eros and against Pallas Athene, and not by any heavenly intervention, but by the ordinary course of nature, those allied deities will be avenged. Lucy entered this army when she pretended to George that she did not love him, and pretended to Cecil that she loved no one. The night received her as it had received Miss Bartlett 30 years before. That concludes chapters 16 and 17. Sorry, it's been a long time since I've read this book, and I had forgotten that little bit. That is a beautiful ending to that chapter. It makes me wonder, what was the story? What had happened to Charlotte Bartlett 30 years before, when she was perhaps betrayed by some cad who spoke of his exploits and who didn't truly feel the way George Emerson does for Lucy. Oh, that is beautiful. Okay, we have only 3 more chapters to go. We're going to read 1 chapter tomorrow, and then we'll conclude on Monday. Thank you very much for joining me. We'll talk a bit about this tomorrow, but I'm just going to sit with my tea and enjoy these feelings. And yeah, so that was a really Yeah, poignant. That was a poignant end to that chapter where Lucy is trying to hide from her feelings, and we see that just that little moment of how this has happened so many times, and can there be a change, or will it happen again? Is this really a time when they can break free from what's holding them into these conventions of how people behave and what they should do? Yeah, it's that was a really nice ending to that section. Okay, and I was not expecting that because I hadn't peeked that far ahead. So thank you very much for joining me today. I loved reading together with you, and I look forward to reading together with you again tomorrow. And please go ahead and vote as to whether next month you would like to only read Dickens, or if you would like to read A Christmas Carol followed by some other separate novel. So thank you very much. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye, friends.